Alrighty, so this is our game, Necromania. We are Michael,
Connor,
Sahir,
Alex,
Andrew.
Our game is about a young wizard who was cast aside by the kingdom's wizard guild. He discovered a strange artifact staff in a graveyard outside the kingdom. It matched the descriptions of a very rare and dangerous magic weapon. After picking it up, he found out that it had the embodiment of an ancient and powerful necromancer trapped within it, which has cursed the young wizard with his powers. The young wizard, now filled with the magical energies of the necromancer, starts on his path to raise an army of skeletons to do his bidding and defeat his enemies in the kingdom.
Going into the design process and the development, Necromania is designed to be a singular level with an entry point that introduces all the game mechanics. The first room, the graveyard, shows all the controls used in the game, so the player has an easy understanding of how to play the game. The graveyard is simplified so that the player won't be attacked by enemies and can get a feel for the environment without any pressure. The design process started with spitballing ideas and drawing out a visual representation of the level with pen and paper. After anonymous consent, we began development. At each major checkpoint, playtesting was done to ensure that end users would be able to provide input and voice concerns that we could address. One example of playtesting influencing the game design is regarding the village houses. The houses were simple decorations that could not be damaged. Multiple playtesters voiced a desire to destroy houses, which led us to include this in the design.
Okay. So initially we started with weekly meetings to kind of get into different ideas that we want to do, get the general gameplay, different abilities that the player would be able to use, different mechanics for the game. And so every team member kind of floated out ideas and concerns, and we try to fit into a general document what we wanted to do. This worked for the first half of our game development. And then during the second half, we met twice a week in order to put in the required work to get all the work done. Our group members had individual tasks such as coding, scripting, design of the game, different artwork pieces, etc. And so we got everything done. So different parts of our level, we have four main parts. The first part, the graveyard, where the player can kind of get into what they're able to do, what kind of controls they can do, and get to feel of controlling the skeletons. The village, where they can actually start have a little bit of fighting and play against the AI, as well as killing houses and peasants. And then we move into the castle, which has a lot harder fighting because there's lots more knights that they have to deal with. And then the final boss room, bit of a larger area to move around in to fight the large, much higher health boss.
Moving on to the characters in our scoring system, there are four different types of characters, including the player. We have peasants, knights, and the boss. Peasants are the weakest enemy that mainly serve as a source of bones for the player to raise more skeletons once their current skeletons stop existing. They don't do any damage to the character and will run away if the player gets too close to them. Knights, on the other hand, have a lot more health than peasants and do quite a bit of damage. The player is no match for a knight without any skeletons. Lastly, the boss has tenfold the amount of health as a traditional knight and has very strong attacks. They can easily defeat the player's army of skeletons if they're not very careful, so the player is going to have to think before they rush into the boss. When it comes to scoring, we originally started out by having the player's score determined by how fast they can complete the level and by how many runestones they collect by mining runestones throughout the game. However, we realized that this didn't give people a lot of incentive to attack the peasants and the knights, so through playtesting we actually determined that we were going to have runestones drop when a player defeats different enemies. So they're still scored based on how fast they can complete the level, but they not only get runestones from mining, but they also get runestones from defeating enemies. Moving on to our implementation, we used GameMaker to develop our game, and we used a multitude of different programs for sprite editors and for making the different music that we used in the game. For our sprites, we mainly used Adobe Fireworks and MS Paint. We went in pixel by pixel and created different 8-bit and 16-bit arts. And then also GameMaker itself has an editor that allowed us to edit different sprites that we had found online or that we had created to better suit our needs. And then there's a website called freesound.org where we found the majority of our sound effects and music. We used GarageBand and Audacity to edit these so that they would be unique to our game, and then we implemented them using GameMaker's editor.
So for the AI we've used, I'd say the main AI we used was state machines, which is kind of hard not to use because state machines are pretty important to game design. Everything in the game uses some kind of state machine, but the most important state machine we used was used in all the different characters. All the characters kind of shared a state machine in a sense. The state variable was just a single integer, and it could have 4 values. It could be 0, 1, 2, or 3. 0 was idle, which meant that it was just sitting around doing almost nothing. Some characters, like the peasants, could move back and forth while idle, but generally the only purpose of the idle state is to simply be available for transition into other states. The following state is number 1. Only skeletons could follow, as of this version. The following is simply when you're given a destination by another character, and you move to that position. The skeletons needed the state in order to stay in formation. The second state, or rather the third state, but state number 2, is alert. An alert is when you have a target and you're moving towards it. The enemies have this alert state. When knights have this alert state, they move towards the skeleton or the player and attack that skeleton. When peasants have this alert state, they move away from skeletons. And when skeletons have this alert state, they move to whatever their target happens to be. It could be a destructible gate, a grave, a ruined rock, all sorts of different things. For number 3, our last state, we could be standing still and damaging a target. With knights, this was equivalent to the other state where they move towards a target. But with skeletons, because they have more complex interactions with obstacles and terrain, we gave them a unique state for just staying still and whacking away at something. Each state has an associated timer that tracks the progress through a state's actions. Furthermore, another element we used was flocking. We don't really use typical flocking for maintaining a movement, but we do use flocking equivalent behavior by making it so that whenever an enemy changes from being idle to alert, it looks at nearby enemies and tells them to be idle or alert. This way, whenever enemies are alerted, they are alerted in groups, which is a more realistic behavior.
So a couple of the other AIs we used included emergent behavior, and the best example of this was with the villagers, where we gave them a couple simple rules of how to move, and so this would be move in a random direction, but if you run into an obstacle, then you need to change your direction quicker so you're not just stuck against the wall. So a couple rules like this led to some interesting behavior. With the villager, when a villager would get stuck against a wall for a moment, they would start shivering, so that was actually something unexpected that came out of those small rules. Another AI we used was formation. So the player character instance is actually responsible for the positions of the skeletons that it's following. The skeletons are assigned positions around the character each frame, and this actually forms a circle around the player character. And then the skeletons, they individually use very limited pathfinding to find these positions. We also had trigger systems, so proximity to the water, that would actually trigger a water sound effect. And then when a skeleton, when that was attacking, met a knight or a villager, that would trigger this other sound effect, which kind of sounded like a shield hit. So that was so the player knew that an attack was going on. And finally, we had scripting. So scripts were mainly used for the characters to compute their movement and then what those movements and the resulting changes to the game. And characters actually share most of their scripts.